Greg. It's wonderful to be back with you, seeing lots of old friends and making new ones. This past summer I retired and asked the question, well, God, what do you have for me next? And I thought back to how I became a Christian in college and what an important time that was to get a foundation in Jesus Christ. And so God's led me back to work with Cru and with my wife. And we don't have a lot of time today. We'd like to give you two snapshots of what that looks like working the full spectrum of student life from middle school and high school up to graduate.
Mother Teresa was asked, what is the biggest problem facing our world today? And she said loneliness. And I thought, wow, she knows American high school kids. She knows high school kids because it can be really lonely, even though you have a lot of friends. And so those are the things that I think about when I think about high school, working with high school kids. They're the least parented in this generation for a long, long time. They're the most open and honestly very tolerant and really generous and loving, but they don't have a lot of spiritual input. And so this is one of those things where we can come alongside. And one of the things that motivates me a lot is most of the people that come to Christ before the age of 18, 3/4 it says. So, so what was I going to say? Oh, I remember now. I wanted to tell you about a young girl from Springfield who grew up without a dad, and her mother needed actually parenting, and so she became the parent in the family. And when I met her, she was taking care of everything. And we invited her to come out to a conference with us, not knowing what would happen. Her name was Abby, or is Abby, and she was going along in the conference, and I was really worried about her in some ways. But she said she went to this one seminar, and it was given by a man who didn't have a dad, and he told how he was angry growing up without a dad and how he struggled in his life. And Abby connected immediately with that story, and she said that she understood that Jesus was her dad. It was pretty exciting. So what happened with Abby? And this is what happened. She grew steadily from that point on, and her mother came to Christ. That was quite an amazing time. And so when she graduated from high school, she was a wonderful artist. She did this triptych, 3 pictures of her journey with Christ. And at her senior art show at the high school, she told anyone that came by about how Christ had really made her whole and become her father, and these pictures showed it. And so Abby's just one of many, many students who are out there waiting to hear, hungry to hear, but we just need somebody to share with them. And so I'll let Dave talk now.
Often when we think of university life, and especially public universities, we think that people there are so busy learning and that often they see God as irrelevant to life. And we know that's the opposite, that God touches every area of our life. But many of them think that they just don't have time to explore their spiritual questions. But the opposite is true. Many professors as well as students have deep spiritual questions. Take Nathan, for example, was a brand new PhD candidate, so he had a contract with a professor and moved here from New York State to Minneapolis to do research in medical equipment. And so I met Nathan through an outreach to incoming freshmen, actually. And he and I sat down for a cup of coffee, and he said, well, I grew up in the Methodist Church. I grew up in a family that was very active and faithful to church, but during my undergraduate college years, I drifted away from God and away from the church. And I knew that when I moved from New York to Minnesota, that Minnesota is much more religious than New York, so I had better decide what I believe. And so God had put this desire in his heart and opened up his mind totally. And now we meet once every couple of 3 weeks and begin to work through his questions. He's found a church and is excited about that, and excited to meet other students who are searching for Christ as well. And I could also say that working with professors, that professors themselves need a safe place that they can gather with a few colleagues to explore their spiritual questions. So we come alongside Christian faculty and help them with ideas and support and prayer on how to reach out to their colleagues and influence their students spiritually as well in a way that's legal and appropriate. And so one professor said that this is his 40th year of teaching, and he said that he guesses roughly over the years he's taught about 10,000 students. So one professor has a huge leverage, a huge influence on the university life. And I'll close just with this image that he said, wherever he travels now, someone will come up to him on every trip and say, "Professor Hill, don't you remember me? 6 years ago, I had you in this lecture." And of course, he doesn't exactly remember who they are, but engages with them and shows us that professors have a huge influence not only over the academic career of students, but over their whole life. And so Christian faculty know that they can influence their students by how they teach, and by how they grade, and by how they treat their students. And so we hope to see a spiritual movement that's similar to the one that's grown up here in La Crosse, in Minnesota as well. Thank you. And Jackie, did you want to close with an offer to meet us afterwards? Yeah.
Well, if anybody would like to talk more about it, glad to talk to you. Or if you have a high school student or a college student that you'd like to get connected with Cru, any of that, we're glad to talk.
Yeah, thank you, Jackie. Thank you, David. At this point, I would ask our ushers to come forward to receive our morning offering as we sing together, "What Child Is This?"